The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and fear, and Hannah Summers couldn't tell which was worse as she pressed her hand against her abdomen, trying to will away the pain that had become her constant companion. The emergency room doctor had finally called her name after 3 hours of waiting, and now she sat on the crinkly paper of the examination table, knowing that whatever came next would cost money she didn't have. Her insurance had lapsed 2 months ago when the graphic design agency she worked for downsized, and the freelance work she'd scrambled to find barely covered rent and groceries. The young doctor who examined her had kind eyes but a worried expression that made Hannah's stomach clench even harder. He ordered tests, mentioned words like inflammation and possible appendicitis, and she found herself nodding along while mentally calculating how much debt she was about to accumulate. When they wheeled her toward the imaging department, she caught sight of her reflection in a window and barely recognized the pale, exhausted woman staring back. That was when she literally crashed into him. The wheelchair the orderly was pushing took a corner too fast, and Hannah's arm knocked into someone standing in the hallway. Papers scattered across the polished floor, and she heard a man's sharp intake of breath. "I'm so sorry," she gasped, trying to bend down to help collect the papers despite the shooting pain in her side. "Don't," he said quickly, his voice deeper than she expected. "You're clearly in pain. Let me handle this." Hannah looked up and found herself staring into the most intense gray eyes she'd ever seen. The man crouching to gather his papers was tall, probably in his early 30s, with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. He wore an expensive suit that seemed out of place in the hospital corridor, and there was something exhausted in his expression that went beyond physical tiredness. "I really am sorry," she said again, as the orderly apologized profusely. The man stood, papers now gathered in his arms, and gave her a slight smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Accidents happen. I hope you feel better soon." Then the orderly was pushing her wheelchair forward again, and the man disappeared behind them. Hannah forgot about him almost immediately as they took her for a CT scan, the machine humming around her while she tried not to think about the bill that would arrive in a few weeks. The diagnosis came 2 hours later: severe kidney infection that had gone untreated for too long. They wanted to admit her for 4 antibiotics, possibly for several days. Hannah felt tears prick her eyes as the doctor explained, and she found herself asking the question she'd been dreading. "How much will this cost?" The doctor's expression shifted to something between sympathy and discomfort. "The financial counselors can discuss payment plans with you. Right now, we need to focus on getting you treated. This could become life-threatening if we don't address it immediately." Hannah nodded, blinking back tears. What choice did she have? She could die or go into crushing debt. Some choice. They moved her to a room on the 4th floor as evening settled over the city. Her roommate's bed was empty, separated from hers by a thin curtain. A nurse with bright purple scrubs came in to start her Roman 4, chatting cheerfully about the weather while Hannah tried not to wince at the needle stick. Once alone, she finally let herself cry, quiet tears that leaked down her temples as she stared at the ceiling tiles. She must have dozed off because she woke to voices in the hallway. Someone was arguing, their tone firm but controlled. "I don't care what the hospital policy is. I'm covering her bills, all of them. Draw up whatever paperwork you need. Mr. Barrett, we appreciate your generosity, but we need to verify that you have the patient's consent for this type of arrangement." Then ask her, "Room 447, Hannah Summers." Hannah's heart stuttered. That was her room number. That was her name. She struggled to sit up as footsteps approached, and then the man from the hallway was standing in her doorway, looking somehow even more exhausted than before, accompanied by a hospital administrator in a crisp suit. "Miss Summers," the administrator said, his tone professionally pleasant. "I apologize for the intrusion. This is Grayson Barrett. He's expressed interest in covering your medical expenses, but we need your consent to proceed." Hannah stared at Grayson Barrett, confusion and suspicion warring in her muzzy, medication-affected brain. "I don't understand. Why would you do that? I don't even know you." Grayson stepped further into the room, and she could see the fine lines of stress around his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. "I know this seems strange. The truth is, I'm here visiting someone, and I overheard part of your conversation with your doctor. I have the means to help, and you need help. It's that simple." "Nothing is that simple," Hannah said, her voice sharper than she intended. "People don't just pay for strangers' medical bills out of the goodness of their hearts. What do you want?" Something flickered across his face, an expression she couldn't quite read. "Nothing. I want nothing from you. Call it paying forward, call it whatever you want. But you need treatment, and you shouldn't have to choose between your health and financial ruin." The administrator cleared his throat. "If you're uncomfortable with this arrangement, Miss Summers, you're under no obligation to accept. However, Mr. Barrett's offer is legitimate. He's a respected businessman in the city, and he's done this before." Hannah looked between them, her head spinning. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. "I can't possibly accept," she heard herself say, even as a desperate voice in her head screamed at her to take the lifeline being offered. "Why not?" Grayson asked, and there was genuine curiosity in his tone. "Pride." "Because I understand pride, but it's not worth your life." "I don't even know you," she repeated weakly. "Then get to know me," he said, and this time his smile was slightly more genuine. "I'm going to be here for a while anyway. My father had a stroke 3 days ago. He's in the ICU on the 6th floor, and the doctors say it's going to be a long recovery. So I'll be around. Consider me your hospital acquaintance who happens to have more money than sense." The administrator looked like he wanted to say something about that last comment, but wisely stayed quiet. Hannah felt tears threatening again, but these were different from the ones she'd shed earlier. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Grayson replied simply. "Let me do this one good thing while everything else in my life feels like it's falling apart." There was such raw honesty in those words that Hannah found herself nodding before she could overthink it. "Okay, yes, thank you. I'll pay you back somehow." "No, you won't," Grayson said firmly. "That's not how this works. Now get some rest. Doctor's orders." He nodded to the administrator and turned to leave. "Wait," Hannah called out. "Your father, I hope he recovers quickly." Grayson paused in the doorway, his back to her. "Thank you," he said quietly, and then he was gone. The next morning, Hannah woke to find a breakfast tray waiting and a note from the hospital's financial department confirming that all her expenses had been covered. She ate the mediocre scrambled eggs in a daze, still half convinced she'd dreamed the entire encounter. But then a nurse came in to check her Roman 4 and mentioned what a generous man Mr. Barrett was, how he'd helped several patients over the years, and Hannah realized it had all been real. She spent most of that day drifting in and out of sleep, the antibiotics making her groggy but already starting to ease the worst of the pain. By evening, she felt alert enough to check her phone and found a dozen worried messages from her best friend, Jessica, who she'd texted from the ER. She was typing out a response when there was a soft knock on her door frame. Grayson stood there, looking slightly less put together than the day before. His tie was loosened, his jacket was gone, and his hair was definitely messier. He held 2 cups of coffee from the shop in the hospital lobby. "I wasn't sure if you'd be awake," he said. "Or if you drink coffee. I probably should have asked before just showing up." I'm awake and I definitely drink coffee, Hannah said, surprised by how glad she was to see him. Hospital coffee. The least terrible option available at 7 in the evening, he confirmed, stepping inside and offering her one of the cups. How are you feeling? Better. The antibiotics are helping. She accepted the coffee gratefully, noting that it was fixed exactly how she liked it, light and sweet, which must have been a lucky guess. How's your father? Grayson's expression clouded. Stable, still unconscious. The doctors say that's normal at this stage, but waiting is brutal. He sank into the visitor's chair like someone who'd been on his feet for too long. I'm not good at waiting. Most people aren't, Hannah said. Especially in hospitals. Everything here moves either too fast or too slow, never just right. Exactly, he said, something like relief in his voice. Everyone keeps telling me to be patient, to trust the process, but I'm used to fixing things. This I can't fix. Hannah studied him over the rim of her coffee cup. In the fluorescent hospital lighting, she could see the shadows under his eyes, the tension in his jaw. Is it just you? Does your father have other family? It's complicated, Grayson said, then seemed to catch himself. Sorry, you don't need to hear about my family drama. You're supposed to be resting. I've been resting all day, Hannah countered. Honestly, I could use the distraction. But only if you want to talk about it. He was quiet for a moment, staring into his coffee cup. My mother died when I was 15. Cancer. My father threw himself into work afterward, building his real estate development company into an empire. I followed in his footsteps, maybe because I didn't know what else to do. We've always had a complicated relationship. He's demanding, critical, never satisfied with anything, but he's still my father. And now he's here, and you can't do anything but wait, Hannah finished softly. And now I can't do anything but wait, he echoed. I've been sitting in that ICU waiting room for 3 days, and I feel completely useless. So when I heard you talking to your doctor yesterday, heard the fear in your voice about the money, I just thought, here's something I can actually do. Here's one problem I can solve. Hannah felt her throat tighten. You solved my biggest problem like it was nothing. Do you have any idea how terrifying it is to be sick and broke at the same time? I don't, he admitted. I've been incredibly fortunate. Which is why I try to use that fortune when I can, especially in situations like this. The administrator said you've done this before. Grayson shrugged, looking almost embarrassed. A few times. My assistant thinks I'm terrible at boundaries, but I don't see the point in having money if you can't use it to help people. They talked for another hour, the conversation flowing easily despite the strangeness of the situation. Hannah learned that Grayson was 32, that he'd taken over his father's company 5 years ago and expanded it into commercial development, that he had a ridiculous sweet tooth and a secret love of old black and white movies. She told him about her graphic design work, about the layoff that had upended her life, about the small apartment she shared with a temperamental cat named Misso. When a nurse came in to check Hannah's vitals, Grayson stood to leave. Same time tomorrow. He asked, and there was something almost hopeful in his expression. I'd like that, Hannah said, and meant it. He visited every evening for the next 4 days. Sometimes they talked about serious things, his father's slow improvement, her worries about finding stable work again. Other times they discussed movies and books, and their completely opposite opinions on whether pineapple belonged on pizza. Grayson had a dry sense of humor that caught Hannah off guard, making her laugh when she least expected it. And underneath his businessman exterior, she found someone thoughtful and genuine, someone who listened when she talked and seemed to actually care about her answers. On her last night in the hospital, Grayson arrived with takeout from an Italian place nearby, having gotten special permission from her doctor. "Hospital food is terrible," he declared, unpacking containers of pasta and salad. "You deserve an actual meal before you're released." They ate together in comfortable silence for a while before Hannah gathered her courage. "I'm going home tomorrow." "I know," Grayson said. "That's wonderful. You've recovered well." "I won't see you every evening anymore," she continued, her heart beating faster. He set down his fork, his gray eyes meeting hers intently. "Would you want to see me, outside of the hospital?" "Yes," Hannah said immediately, then felt her cheeks warm. "Sorry, that was probably too eager." "That was perfect," Grayson said, his smile transforming his entire face. "I was worried I was reading this wrong, that maybe you were just being nice to the guy who paid your medical bills." "Are you kidding? I've looked forward to your visits every day. You're the best part of being stuck here," Hannah said. "Well, that and the healing, obviously." He laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Can I take you to dinner? A real dinner at a table that isn't in a hospital room?" "I would really like that," Hannah said. 3 days later, Grayson picked her up at her apartment in a sleek black car that probably cost more than she'd earned in the past 2 years. She'd agonized over what to wear, finally settling on a simple blue dress that Jessica had insisted looked perfect. When Grayson saw her, his expression made all the wardrobe anxiety worthwhile. "You look beautiful," he said simply, offering his arm. He took her to a French restaurant with soft lighting and excellent wine. Over duck confit and chocolate mousse, they continued the conversations they'd started in the hospital, but everything felt different now. This was a date, real and intentional, and the attraction that had been building between them was impossible to ignore. "Tell me something I don't know about you," Hannah said as they shared dessert. Grayson considered the question. "I'm terrified of failure, always have been. My father's expectations were so high growing up that I became obsessed with being perfect at everything. It's exhausting." "You seem pretty perfect to me," Hannah said, then immediately wanted to take it back when she saw his expression shift. "I'm not," he said seriously. "I work too much. I'm terrible at relationships because I always prioritize business. I have a temper that I've had to learn to control. I'm impatient and demanding, and my last girlfriend told me I was emotionally unavailable before she left." Hannah reached across the table and took his hand. "You didn't seem emotionally unavailable when you were sitting with me every night, telling me about your father, listening to my worries." "That seems pretty emotionally available to me." He turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. "You're different. From the moment I saw you in that hallway, looking so brave despite being in pain, something just clicked. I can't explain it." "I don't think you need to explain it," Hannah said softly. "I felt it too." He drove her home later, walking her to her door like a gentleman from another era. When he kissed her goodnight, soft and sweet, Hannah felt like every romance novel cliché she'd ever rolled her eyes at was suddenly making perfect sense. Over the next few weeks, they fell into an easy pattern. Grayson was still spending time at the hospital as his father slowly recovered, and Hannah was rebuilding her freelance client base, but they made time for each other every day. Coffee dates in the morning, quick lunches between meetings, dinners that stretched late into the evening. Grayson met Misso, who immediately loved him despite being notoriously aloof with strangers. Hannah visited him at his office, a stunning space on the 35th floor with views of the entire city. One evening, about a month after they'd started dating, Grayson took her to meet his father, who had finally been moved to a regular room and was alert, if weak. Gerald Barrett was a formidable man, even flat on his back in a hospital bed. He studied Hannah with sharp eyes that reminded her uncomfortably of a hawk assessing prey. "So you're the girl my son has been mooning over," he said, his voice rough from the stroke. "Dad," Grayson said, a warning in his tone. "I'm Hannah," she said, refusing to be intimidated. She stepped forward and offered her hand. "It's nice to meet you, Mr. Barrett. Grayson speaks highly of you." Gerald's handshake was weaker than he probably wanted, but his grip was still firm. "Does he? That's generous of him. We don't always see eye to eye." "Most fathers and sons don't," Hannah replied. "But he's been here every day since your stroke. That says something." Something shifted in Gerald's expression, a softening around his eyes. "You've got backbone, I appreciate that. My son needs someone who won't let him steamroll them." "I don't steamroll people," Grayson protested, but he was smiling. They visited for 30 minutes before a nurse shooed them out, saying Gerald needed rest. In the hallway, Grayson pulled Hannah into his arms. "Thank you," he murmured against her hair, "for being kind to him, for being here." "Where else would I be?" Hannah asked, pulling back to look at him. "I'm falling in love with you," Grayson said suddenly, the words tumbling out like he couldn't hold them back anymore. "I know it's fast and maybe that's crazy, but I can't help it. You've changed everything for me." Hannah's breath caught. "It's not crazy. I'm falling in love with you too. I think I have been since you brought me coffee on that first night." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and Hannah thought distantly that they were probably violating hospital conduct codes, but she couldn't bring herself to care. Their relationship deepened as summer turned to fall. Grayson's father continued to recover, eventually moving to a rehabilitation facility. Hannah's freelance business was thriving, and she'd even hired a part-time assistant. They spent weekends exploring the city, finding hidden bookstores and hole-in-the-wall restaurants. Grayson taught her to appreciate fine wine, and she introduced him to her favorite vintage clothing markets. They were different in many ways, but somehow those differences made them fit together better. One Saturday in October, Grayson took her to see a property his company was developing, a historic building they were converting into mixed-use space. "I wanted your opinion on something," he said as they climbed the stairs to the third floor. "We're reserving the top floor for creative spaces, studios for artists and designers. I thought maybe you'd like to look at them, see if one might work for you." Hannah stopped walking. "Grayson, I can't afford space in a building like this." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "What if I told you I want you to have it as a gift?" "I'd say no," Hannah replied immediately. "You already paid my hospital bills. I can't let you keep giving me things." "Why not?" "Because it's not balanced. Because people will think I'm with you for your money. Because I need to maintain my own independence." She crossed her arms, frustrated. "I appreciate the thought, I really do, but this is too much." Grayson ran his hand through his hair, a gesture she'd learned meant he was agitated. "I have so much money, Hannah. More than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. Why is it wrong to want to share that with someone I love?" "It's not wrong," Hannah said carefully, "but it makes me uncomfortable. I need to know that I'm building my own success, not just riding on yours." They'd had variations of this argument before, and it never quite resolved. Grayson wanted to shower her with gifts and opportunities, and Hannah wanted to maintain her independence. It was the one source of real tension between them. "What if it's not a gift?" Grayson asked suddenly. "What if you pay rent like everyone else, but I give you a discount because you're helping me with the design concept for the whole floor? I really do want your input on this project." Hannah considered that. "A small discount, and I do the design work for free as payment." "A reasonable discount, and I pay you for the design work because you're a professional." "You're impossible," Hannah said, but she was smiling. "Is that a yes?" "That's a maybe. Show me the space first." He did, and it was perfect. Huge windows with northern light, exposed brick walls, enough room for her drafting table and computer setup with space left over. Hannah tried not to let her excitement show, but Grayson knew her too well by now. "You love it," he said confidently. "I do," she admitted. "Okay, we'll work out the details, but yes, thank you." He kissed her, soft and sweet, and whispered, "Seeing you happy makes everything worth it." By December, Hannah had moved into her new studio and was working on her biggest commission yet, a complete rebrand for a chain of boutique hotels. Grayson's father had recovered enough to return home with a full-time nurse, and while he still had a long way to go, the doctors were optimistic. Grayson seemed lighter somehow, the constant worry that had shadowed him when they first met finally easing. They spent Christmas together at Grayson's penthouse apartment, which Hannah had helped him decorate because his idea of festive was a single wreath on the door. "You need a tree," she'd insisted, "and lights, and stockings, even if it's just the two of us." Now the space looked warm and inviting, the tree twinkling in the corner while they cooked dinner together. Well, Grayson cooked while Hannah provided moral support and taste tested everything. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, snow was starting to fall over the city. "I have something for you," Grayson said as they settled on the couch after dinner, both full of roast chicken and too much wine. "We said we weren't doing gifts," Hannah protested, but she was already reaching for the small, wrapped box he'd pulled from behind a cushion. "I lied," he said, grinning. Inside the box was a key, simple and silver. Hannah looked at him questioningly. "It's to this apartment," Grayson explained, suddenly looking nervous in a way she rarely saw. "I know we've only been together for 7 months and maybe this is too fast, but I want you here. Not just visiting, but living here. With me. I love you, Hannah. I love coming home to you. I love waking up next to you. I love the way you've made my life fuller and brighter and better in every possible way." Hannah felt tears prick her eyes. "I love you too. So much. But your apartment is huge and fancy and I have Miso, and I don't know if I'm ready to give up my independence completely." "So don't," Grayson said quickly. "Keep your apartment if you want, keep your studio obviously, keep everything that's yours. I'm not asking you to give anything up. I'm just asking you to share more of your life with me. And Miso is obviously included in this invitation. I've already bought him a cat tree." "You bought my cat furniture. He's going to be my cat too, isn't he?" Hannah laughed through her tears. "You're really serious about this?" "I've never been more serious about anything," Grayson said. He cupped her face in his hands, his gray eyes intense. "Move in with me. Let me wake up next to you every morning. Let me be the person you come home to." "Yes," Hannah whispered. "Yes, absolutely yes." He kissed her then, and it felt like a promise, like a future unfolding before them. Hannah moved in gradually over the next month, bringing her clothes and books and personal items while Grayson cleared space and made the apartment feel like theirs instead of just his. Miso adapted quickly, claiming the sunniest spot by the windows as his territory. They developed routines, morning coffee together before work, evening walks through the neighborhood, lazy Sunday mornings in bed. Spring brought new challenges. Grayson was negotiating a massive development deal that consumed most of his time, and Hannah was preparing for her first gallery show, displaying the personal art pieces she'd created alongside her commercial work. The stress made them both short-tempered, and they had their first real fight on a Tuesday night in April when Grayson forgot about the gallery opening because of a business dinner. "I told you about this weeks ago," Hannah said, her voice tight with hurt. "This is important to me." "I know, and I'm sorry," Grayson replied, loosening his tie with jerky movements. "The dinner ran late and I lost track of time. I tried to make it there. You could have left early. You could have told them you had a prior commitment. This deal is worth $40 million, Hannah." I couldn't just walk out. And my show was worth what? Nothing. She knew she was being unfair, but the hurt was too fresh. Grayson's jaw tightened. That's not what I said. Don't put words in my mouth. You didn't have to say it. Your actions said it for you. Hannah grabbed her coat. I need some air. She walked for an hour, her mind churning. This was what Grayson had warned her about at that first dinner, wasn't it? That he prioritized business, that he was bad at relationships. But she'd thought things were different with them. She'd thought she was different. When she returned to the apartment, she found Grayson sitting on the couch in the dark, his head in his hands. I'm sorry, he said before she could speak. You're right. I should have been there. I got so caught up in the deal and trying to prove myself that I forgot what actually matters. You matter, Hannah. More than any business deal, more than any amount of money. I was an idiot. Hannah sat down beside him. I'm sorry, too. I know your work is important and I shouldn't have minimized that, but I need to feel like I'm a priority in your life. You are, Grayson said fiercely. You're the most important thing in my life. I've just spent so many years putting work first that sometimes I fall back into old patterns. But I'm trying to change that. I want to change that for you, for us. They talked for hours that night, really talked about their expectations and fears and needs. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. And when they finally went to bed, wrapped around each other, Hannah felt like they'd turned a corner. Grayson proved his words with actions after that. He attended every one of her client meetings that she wanted him at, helped her celebrate when she landed a major corporate account, and planned a surprise party when her gallery show sold out. In return, Hannah made an effort to understand the pressure he was under, attending business functions at his side and learning about the development world he inhabited. In July, a year after they'd met in that hospital hallway, Grayson took Hannah on a weekend trip to a coastal town 3 hours away. They stayed at a charming bed and breakfast, spent their days walking on the beach and their evenings at seaside restaurants. It was perfect and peaceful, and Hannah felt more relaxed than she had in months. On their last evening, Grayson suggested a walk along the cliffs overlooking the ocean. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. They stopped at a viewpoint and Grayson turned to face her. Do you remember what you said to me in the hospital that first night? He asked. Hannah thought back. I said a lot of things, mostly variations of thank you and are you sure about this? You said that people don't just help strangers out of the goodness of their hearts, Grayson reminded her. You asked what I wanted. I remember, Hannah said softly. I told you I wanted nothing, Grayson continued. But that wasn't entirely true. I did want something. I just didn't realize it until later. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and dropped to one knee. Hannah's breath caught, her hand flying to her mouth. I wanted this, Grayson said, opening the box to reveal a stunning ring, a sapphire surrounded by diamonds. I wanted you in my life. I wanted someone who would call me on my nonsense and make me laugh and show me that there's more to life than work and success. I wanted to fall in love with someone real and brave and absolutely extraordinary. Hannah Summers, you healed my heart in ways I didn't even know it needed healing. Will you marry me? Yes, Hannah said through tears. Yes, of course, yes. He slid the ring onto her finger and stood, pulling her into his arms. They kissed as the sun set over the ocean, and Hannah thought about how strange life was, how a random collision in a hospital hallway could lead to this moment. I love you, she whispered against his lips. I love you too, Grayson replied. Thank you for crashing into me, she laughed. Thank you for paying my hospital bills. Best money I ever spent. They married 4 months later in a small ceremony at the Botanical Gardens, surrounded by close friends and family. Gerald Barrett attended in a wheelchair, still recovering but determined to see his son married. He pulled Hannah aside before the ceremony. "You've been good for him," he said gruffly. "He's happier than I've ever seen him. Thank you for that." "He's been good for me too," Hannah replied. "He saved my life in more ways than one." Gerald nodded approvingly. "Take care of each other." The ceremony was simple and perfect. Hannah wore a vintage lace gown she'd found at one of her favorite markets, and Grayson's expression when he saw her walk down the aisle made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. They wrote their own vows, promising to support each other, to communicate honestly, to never let work come before their relationship, to build a life together based on love and respect and partnership. At the reception, they danced under string lights while Jessica gave a speech about how she'd known from Hannah's first phone call that Grayson was special. Grayson's business partner talked about how much happier and more balanced he'd become since meeting Hannah. And when they cut the cake, Grayson smudged frosting on Hannah's nose, making her laugh and retaliate until they were both a mess. "No regrets?" Grayson asked as they swayed together during the last dance of the night. "Not a single one," Hannah said. "You." "My only regret is not crashing into you sooner," he replied, and kissed her as their family and friends cheered. They honeymooned in Italy. 2 weeks of exploring ancient cities and eating incredible food and making love in beautiful hotel rooms. When they returned, they settled into married life with surprising ease. They were partners in the truest sense, supporting each other's dreams and ambitions while building something together that was greater than either of them alone. A year after their wedding, Hannah's design firm had grown to include 3 full-time employees and was being featured in industry magazines. Grayson had successfully completed his $40 million development and was being courted by investors from around the world. But more importantly, they were happy. They still had date nights every week, still talked for hours about everything and nothing, still made each other laugh. One evening in early autumn, Hannah felt nervous as she prepared dinner. She'd been planning this for weeks, wanting the moment to be perfect. When Grayson came home from work, she'd already set the table with candles and his favorite meal. "What's the occasion?" he asked, kissing her hello. "Can't I make a nice dinner for my husband?" Hannah replied, but her smile gave her away. Grayson studied her face. "What's going on? You look like you're about to burst." Hannah took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby." Grayson's eyes went wide, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Then he was lifting her up and spinning her around, laughing and crying at the same time. "We're having a baby." "Really? Really?" Hannah confirmed. "I found out yesterday. I'm about 8 weeks along." He set her down gently, immediately worried. "Should I have picked you up like that? Is that safe?" "Oh God, I don't know anything about pregnant women," Hannah laughed. "It's fine, I'm fine, we're fine." "We're having a baby," Grayson repeated, wonder in his voice. He cupped her face and kissed her softly. "I love you so much. Thank you for this. Thank you for everything." "Thank you for noticing me in that hospital hallway," Hannah said. "Thank you for being stubborn enough to pay my bills even when I tried to refuse. Thank you for showing me what real love looks like." The pregnancy was smooth, and their daughter was born the following May on a warm spring morning. They named her Grace, and she had Grayson's gray eyes and Hannah's smile. Watching her husband hold their daughter for the first time, seeing the absolute love and devotion in his expression, Hannah felt her heart might burst from happiness. Gerald visited them in the hospital, his recovery now complete enough that he walked with just a cane. He held baby Grace with surprising gentleness, tears streaming down his weathered face. "She's perfect," he said. "Absolutely perfect. Just like her mother," Grayson added, smiling at Hannah. Life settled into a new rhythm after that. Hannah cut back her work hours to spend more time with Grace, while Grayson became ruthless about maintaining work-life balance, often leaving the office early to be home for dinner. They moved to a bigger apartment with space for a nursery and a proper office for Hannah. Misso tolerated the baby with dignified patience and eventually became her devoted guardian. On their third wedding anniversary, as they watched Grace take her first wobbly steps across the living room, Hannah reflected on how much had changed since that day in the hospital when she'd crashed into a stranger and he'd changed her entire life. "What are you thinking about?" Grayson asked, wrapping his arm around her waist. "Just how grateful I am," Hannah said, "for all of this. For you. If I hadn't gotten sick, if you hadn't been at the hospital that day, if you hadn't decided to help me, none of this would exist." "I think we would have found each other somehow," Grayson replied. "Some things are just meant to be." Grace squealed with delight as she successfully crossed the room and crashed into Grayson's legs. He scooped her up, making her giggle. "Dada," she said clearly, and Grayson's entire face lit up. Hannah watched her husband and daughter together and felt a wave of contentment wash over her. She thought about that scared, sick woman in the hospital room, wondering how she'd pay her bills and survive. She thought about the man who'd appeared like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known how to voice. She thought about how his care and generosity had healed more than just her body, how he'd shown her what it meant to be truly loved and supported. "I love you," she told Grayson, the words feeling inadequate for the depth of what she felt. He understood anyway. He always did. "I love you too, both of you, my whole world." Grace reached for Hannah and they stood there together, the three of them, bathed in afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. It was a simple moment, quiet and unremarkable to anyone else. But to Hannah, it was everything. It was the life she'd built with the man who'd supported her through illness, not knowing his care would heal her heart. It was love, real and lasting and true. It was home. And as Grayson pulled them both close, pressing kisses to Grace's head and Hannah's temple, she knew with absolute certainty that this was exactly where she was meant to be. They'd found each other in the most unlikely of places, but they'd built something extraordinary together. A partnership. A family. A love story that started with an act of kindness and grew into something neither of them could have imagined. Years later, people would ask them how they met, and they'd smile at each other before answering. In a hospital, they'd say, during one of the hardest times in both their lives. And somehow, in the middle of all that fear and uncertainty, they'd found each other. They'd found love. They'd found forever. That night, after Grace was asleep and they were curled up together on the couch, Hannah traced the ring on her finger, the sapphire catching the light. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd said no that first night?" she asked. "If I'd refused to let you pay my bills," Grayson considered that. "I would have found another way to help. I would have kept showing up at your hospital room until you agreed to at least be friends. I wouldn't have been able to walk away from you." "How did you know?" Hannah asked. "That first day, how did you know I was worth all of this?" "I didn't know," Grayson admitted. "Not consciously, but something in me recognized something in you. Maybe it was the way you tried to help pick up my papers even though you were in pain. Maybe it was the fear and determination in your eyes. Maybe it was just fate. But I'm so glad I trusted that instinct." "Me too," Hannah whispered, snuggling closer to him. "Me too." They sat in comfortable silence, both thinking about the journey that had brought them here. From strangers colliding in a hospital hallway to partners in every sense of the word. From a simple act of generosity to a love that had transformed both their lives. It hadn't always been easy, but it had always been worth it. And as Hannah drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, safe and loved and happy, she sent a silent thank you to that scared woman in the emergency room who'd had the courage to say yes to a stranger's help. because that one decision, that leap of faith, had led to absolutely everything that mattered. Grayson pressed a kiss to her forehead, his own eyes closing as he held his family close. He thought about his father's recovery, about the fear he'd felt sitting in that ICU waiting room, about the moment he'd heard Hannah's voice, and decided to do something good in a world that felt like it was falling apart. He'd thought he was saving her that day, but the truth was she'd saved him just as much. She'd shown him how to live beyond work, how to love without reservation, how to be the man he'd always wanted to be but never quite managed until she came into his life. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and joys as all tomorrows did, but they would face them together as they'd faced everything since that fateful day. As partners, as lovers, as friends, as family, and that made all the difference. In the nursery down the hall, Grace slept peacefully, dreaming baby dreams. She'd grow up in a home filled with love and laughter, with parents who adored each other and her. She'd hear the story of how they met over and over, and she'd understand that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. But that was all in the future. For now, in this moment, everything was perfect. 3 hearts beating in harmony, a family built on love and trust and the kind of generosity that changes lives. It was more than Hannah had ever dreamed of during those dark days when she'd been sick and scared and alone. It was more than Grayson had imagined possible when he'd been drowning in grief and responsibility. It was everything, and it was theirs, forever.